Welcome. I got a cool one today. So I got Hillary Cole. She spent 10 years in Air Force intelligence, linguistics, counterterrorism, and pivoted into wine. She's a French wine scholar, Napa Valley wine expert, Champagne Burgundy master, and she is also the author of a new book. So her book, called Vineyards of War, A Chronology of Conflict in Wine Regions since 6000 BC, is exactly what it sounds like. So this is a history of what happens when wine is involved in everything as it's on fire. So this is written by somebody who actually served in a world of conflict before she fell in love with the world of wine. She now lives in Albania, and so she's joining me from there. Welcome to Hillary Cole. Hillary, thank you so much for being with me. I know you're in Albania now, which is great. And so you had to make this work. So talk to me a little bit, and then we're going to get into obviously wine and other stuff. So why Albania? And what do you what do you recommend to people about this kind of expat lifestyle? Because you've obviously lived it.
Because I'm living it.
Yeah.
Albania has ended up being one of the most pleasant surprises. I initially, I left the US at the end of September, spent 3 months in Milan first, and I initially had considered going to Georgia because Georgia has a longer visa for Americans as well. But as I got to thinking about the logistics, at the time, my German Shepherd, he unfortunately passed away 5 days before I left Milan. And at the time, he was scheduled to be with me. And as I got to thinking about logistics and everything, I decided Georgia was a little further away than I wanted to be if I need to get back to the States for a project or something. So just in looking through the visa processes and links at the time, I landed on Albania, and obviously, like, I knew of Albania, but I didn't know that much about it, and that's probably not a surprise because they went through a very intense period of the whole country being closed down under communism, and just got out from under that in the 90s. So they're still developing, and the more I learned about the country and the people and everything, the more I was like, well, let's live there. What could go wrong, because the visa is a year here, or the non-visa time is a year here. So I went to Milan first because I had spent a lot of time in Milan throughout my life, and I felt like that would be the easy, soft landing to transition into being a full-time expat and not just a traveler. Um, so Albania ended up being home. I was planning to be here for a year, but now I've decided to stay until or unless some door opens that looks cool.
So um, it is interesting to me, this whole conversation. We need to set it up a little bit with your background. So the one thing that is always been compelling to me is that wine attracts people kind of from every angle, and yours is pretty
Yeah.
unique. So you had 10 years in Air Force intelligence, linguistics, counterterrorism, and so tell me about how somebody with that background ends up here talking about wine, war, young people, whatever we're about to talk about.
Yeah, that's I get asked that a lot.
Yeah.
I used to work in wineries in Napa before I became the director of sales and marketing. I would host groups coming in, and so I would get that question a lot, especially as the day wore down and my Texas accent started coming forward a little. And so people would, get curious and ask about the background. So I've been asked the "How did you go from intelligence to wine?" question. And it's an unusual answer, but believe it or not, there's actually a lot of crossover. I got to thinking about how to put together an effective intelligence product. You have to understand, the history, the religion, the topography, climate, geology, geography, all these things. And one night, I was swirling a glass of Barolo, and this was probably 2012, 2013, 2012. And I kind of languished when I got out of the intelligence field. It was a tough transition for me. not only just by virtue of everything that had gone on in my intelligence career, because I started as a Russian linguist, and on 9/11 got reassigned to counterterrorism, and then I had to learn Pakistani Punjabi. Um, and so, just with everything that was going on in our post 9/11 response, that was intense. Um, so you don't go from that world to, you know, working at Best Buy. It's just it's hard to find something that's going to really engage you intellectually, and keep interest. So I languished, and one night I was swirling a glass of Barolo. One of my friends had given me a bottle, and I was reading about the area, and I came to realize that, like, when you read about wine, all the things, all the elements that I missed learning to do effective intelligence were in every bottle of wine. It's just a different outcome, you know. So I decided, I drink wine a lot and I love wine. I didn't know anything about it. I just knew I liked drinking it. If you were to ask me to parse the difference between, you know, Barolo and Burgundy, I wouldn't have been able to.
Right.
But
We call that being a normal human, by the way. So this is,
yes,
yeah, you're a normal human.
this is
Despite,
pretty absolute insane.
right.
Yes.
And
Um,
and so as you're sitting there, right, and you're kind of having a little bit of this realization, reading about the Barolo region, it was,
mhm.
I guess, more the connection between the two for
Yeah,
you.
it was that all the elements and disciplines of humanity that you have to really truly understand, to understand a battlescape, to put together intelligence, like all of those aspects are in intelligence products. And so for me it was a way to re-engage those intellectual pieces of humanity that I missed so much, and do it through wine. um, and I was like, I already wine is my go-to beverage. I'll have a margarita from time to time, a French 75 from time to time, but wine was always my go-to beverage. So I decided, why not follow that trail? And I looked at, like, different, like, what do professional wine people do? And at the time I was living in Lodi, California. So, Lodi is, of course, its own wine region, and I was having fun, like, going out to the wineries and stuff. And so I started looking at, like, how can I do this for a living, and back into it through my intelligence career. So I went through the sommelier exams, and by then I was working at a winery during the day, and a wine bar at night. So I was burning both ends, and started out serving tables, waiting tables. I mean, when I say I started over, it was like starting over. Um, so I started out waiting tables and worked my way up to bartender, and then did the sommelier exams. And after I finished the first one, got a job as the general manager and wine director for one of the restaurants in Sacramento. And so that's kind of how my career trajectory went. Um, but I loved how wine can be as just frivolously delicious, just something that you have because you want it, and you get a little tipsy and it tastes really good, or as intellectually engaging as you want it to be. You can choose, there's a whole range. You can choose where you want to fall in that range. And, some nights I did just want to turn my brain off and drink a bunch of wine. And other times I wanted to really understand the wine, backing into it from um, more of that intelligence product style of thinking.
Yeah, and some nights combine the two, I suppose, where you think
Yeah.
you think you're
Well,
going deep into a region, and then you realize you
yeah,
just went deep into the third bottle.
get very philosophical.
But one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you is your
Mhm.
book. So, Vineyards of War.
Mhm.
So obviously, you had been producing a great deal of written material in your job, but this
Mhm.
is a totally different beast. So, what made you want to write it in the first place? What was kind of the inspiration for this
Um,
book?
Champagne was. Champagne's my first love when it comes to wine regions. So I'm Champagne first, French after that, and then a lot of other places within Europe, and then everything else. Um, and what made me fall in love with Champagne was that I knew some of the history. And the first time I went there, one of the history facts that I had learned was that that's where Attila the Hun was finally stopped. And of course, Champagne's 90 miles east of Paris, and so Paris, even before it was called Paris, when it was Lutetia, has always been a holy grail, for warfare. And he had gone all the way across Europe, just plowing through Europe, winning, 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 and then finally in this unassuming meadow, in kind of the southern central or central eastern part of the Champagne region, that's where they stopped him. And I knew this little factoid, and one of the reasons I remembered it is because it was September 21st, 451 AD, and that September 21st is my sister's birthday. So it
Okay.
was like, yeah, it's something very easy for me to remember that I was just fascinated by. And then the first time I went to Champagne, uh, I had rented a car in Munich and drove over to Alsace and then up to Champagne and saw the signs, for Chalon sur Marne. And I instantly took a picture of the GPS in my car, and it was actually my Facebook cover photo for a long time. And I stopped where the battle was, and it was so peaceful, and I was just thinking about like how, like, this place right here, if this battle had gone differently back in 451, so many things about it. It's impossible to truly, I think, gauge exactly how long the changes would have been if Attila the Hun had won that battle. But so many things about Western civilization as we know it um, would have, at the very least, been severely delayed, if not impossible. Um, and so, as I continued my exploration of the region, going from house to house and restaurants and stuff, I found every person there to be so hospitable, and like truly some of the best hospitality I've experienced in my life. And I loved how, as I researched more about everything that had happened there, you find that pretty much every century that region has been a major theater of battle.
Yep.
Um, and so when you think about the number of times they've had to rebuild and how there's not photos of grandfathers and grandsons, after the camera comes around, um, it's extraordinary to me in the spirit of those people that the same people who have experienced this frequency of devastation could have something in their souls and something in their spirits that also gives them the ability to create like the one beverage that is most synonymous with the concept of celebration. Like you can pour a beer to celebrate, you can make a cocktail, you can have a Coke Zero, whatever. You can open a Barolo, but and yeah, you'll celebrate with those. But when you hear the of a champagne cork, when you hear that, that's I think a universal signal of now it's a party. Now it's
Yeah,
a celebration.
it is a super interesting contrast, right? And so obviously this like moment when you visited triggered some sort of idea that, hey,
Mhm.
I should go a little bit deeper into this, but you go a lot deeper into this. So this book is great, right? Because it really is about the intersection between these two things that are not necessarily, I guess, to a non-wine person, although we're on a podcast, we're talking to wine people, but a non-wine person would be like, what do those, things have in common? And so there was a moment where you went
Yes.
a little bit deeper. So
Yeah.
tell me about that. What was the inspiration to go from, hey, this is a really kind of cool story, to I'm really gonna learn a little bit about the history of wine and walk my readers through how that fits into our history, which, by the way, we seem to conflate with war all the time. We just like
Yes.
history is told through war. But
Yes.
what it was that made you take that next step?
Well, as I considered, Champagne's history with war, I'm a nerd at heart. First thing you can call me is a nerd. Like I literally have a spiral notebook that's a running list of things to Google.
That
That's
that's pretty awesome. Mostly because we sit there and we just Google all day. The fact that you could put that in a system and just be
yeah,
like, I'm going to spend some time Googling and here's my list
yeah,
is maybe a credit to you as opposed to the rest of us. But in any case, from one nerd to another, I do understand your point. Yep.
yeah.
So you start nerding out.
Yeah, so I figured, if Champagne has this history, other regions have to. And it was, I don't know that I started out ever intending to write a book. I started out as a journalism major in college before switching to terrorism studies. And I grew up writing. I was always a writer. I was always a good academic writer. Uh, you want to talk about nerds? I lettered in high school. I lettered in journalism, so, which it's a thing. You can letter in journalism, um, and so I've always been an academic and analytic writer. I don't know that when I first started learning about these things, I initially conceptualized writing a book about it, but as I started learning. More and more regions that had been severely influenced by warfare, it did become something that, and I didn't start it immediately. I would just, when I would accidentally come across something, um, I would kind of catalog it and I would write a passage in my head, and I would save where I came across things, and then as time allowed, I would go and I would pursue information about it. Um, Last year in March of 2025, I my position at the last winery I was with was eliminated. Tariffs, all that stuff. We all know the wine industry's in a little bit of trouble in the U.S., especially in California. And so my position had been eliminated. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, I think I'll write that book. So that's that's what I decided to do.
And
So I
so roughly what was this as far as dedication of time? Because obviously it's not written in a week.
right.
So how long did this take you, and what was that process like for somebody who was doing it for the first time?
It was grueling because I was self-publishing. I didn't want to take the time to shop publishers and everything, and I also wanted to 100% own it upon completion. I wasn't really sure. I don't know enough about the publishing world to take the time to do that, and I knew that I wanted it published within a year. Um, Last year was, I think, in a lot of ways, the book was the branch that I needed to pour myself into because 8 days after my position got eliminated, my mother passed away. And then I had to have an emergency surgery for a thing on a submandibular gland. And then I was diagnosed with cancer. And then I had to have surgery for that and do a radiation. And then my German Shepherd, I was training him to be able to fly in the plane with me. He broke his tail. We moved September 30th. So in that 6 months, all these things were compacted while I was writing
Yeah.
the book. And then he got diagnosed with my dog, my German Shepherd, got diagnosed with a end stage incurable cancer that's also like undetectable until it's too late to do anything um, in Milan. And so I think in a lot of ways the book was staying focused on it. It felt like the only thing I could control. And there were days that I was too exhausted. Like when the cancer was thyroid, and when your thyroid comes out, the level of exhaustion is sometimes insurmountable. Um, and some days I would only have like 4 hours of gas in the tank to be able to even think through the fog. And I would spend that 4 hours on the book like religiously every single day. Um, I had hired a company that was supposed to. I created the cover art, and I hired a company that was supposed to do the proofreading, formatting, all that stuff. I didn't know anything about that. I'd never done it before, and they ended up being a scam. So that was delightful. I was like, well, now I got to learn how to do this part too.
This story went from sad to one of our best intelligence officers getting scammed on the internet, but
Yeah,
so you really learned the whole way through and
the
what
whole
to
part.
do and how to handle it, and obviously you share a lot in it.
Mhm.
The champagne story that you told just a few minutes ago, I really liked that, and I was wondering if there's another part of the book that was just really compelling to you as you were writing it or researching it, where you're like, "Huh, this is pretty interesting too."
There was, and most of it was like the more recent wars for some reason. Like but learning about you know the Shulavari culture and everything. I didn't know anything about those before digging into the research and everything. And that's fascinating. It's all fascinating things. The ancient Egyptian pieces. I love history in general. I'm just fascinated by humans because we're kind of jerks, and it's crazy to me that this is how we conduct ourselves. But I also find it fascinating. um, and so that all I found really interesting, and it was hard to. I had to force myself because I can be very verbose, and especially when writing. So I would have to force myself to cut paragraphs and passages to not get too in the thick of it. I didn't want it to be as long as Les Mis, not Victor
Sure,
Hugo here. So I wanted to keep it a length that people would finish, and I wanted to keep the information where people would finish the information before moving on to the next war. But as we get into modernity, and like the late '90s, those were, I think, the ones that really surprised me the most. And the one that stuck out to me was when I got to the Kosovo War, because that war was happening when I was at the Defense Language Institute learning Russian. And my roommate was a Serbian Croat linguist, so she was learning Serbian Croat, Serbian Croatian. We call it Croat. Um, and so we always had the news on in the, we call it the day room, the common area with the TV. We always had the news on, and it was always, Kosovo War news when I was there, because I arrived February of '98 and left in July of '99. So, that's Kosovo War. And that one stood out to me because, I was at the very beginning of my intelligence career learning my first language. And here I am almost 30 years later, you know, um, having had a full career there, and I've gone through a full wine career, and now this war that was the topic of news all day every day at the beginning of my intelligence career is representing itself at this point in my wine career. And I just thought that was a very cool kind of full circle moment. Um, and had never even, I mean, now I drink Kosovo wine all the time. You go downstairs to one of the bars downstairs and order a glass of white wine. It's going to be, a Pinot Grigio from Kosovo. Um, and I just it didn't even dawn on me back then that wine regions would have been involved. And unfortunately, the war, they were just starting to get a proper wine industry going. And that war really decimated it and set them back quite a bit. And it took, I want to say, about 10 years, if I remember correctly, for them to work through all the humanitarian issues and also just like getting all the landmines out and everything. So they've only really recently got to start putting back into the wine industry and trying to grow it again. And it was really interesting that as I was writing this book, like I said, it was a full circle moment that the war that was the topic of conversation at the beginning of my military career it pops up as I'm writing this book, and towards the end of the book, so it was striking. And another thing that I found really interesting was I included in the appendix a list of treaties, a chart of treaties that have also influenced wine, that may or may not be connected to a war, because sometimes we just have those geopolitical things, and um, there's so many treaties that have affected the wine region. And one of the ones that struck me the most was like number one, a treaty going all the way back to 3000 BC. I was like, they had treaties back then. um, it just, it just conceptually, I don't know why they wouldn't have, but conceptually, I was like, well, um, and the other one was Hammurabi's Code, because I feel like Hammurabi's Code is probably one of the first treaties when you're a kid that really lands and sticks with you. I had no idea that Hammurabi's Code had influenced wine as well, and I just thought that was so cool. I was like, wow, this was one of the first treaties I had to study in history class.
So, one of the reasons why we're talking, and I just talked to Don and PD Cladstra about Wine and War, is this idea that history is very accessible to young people. In other words, it's something that doesn't take a lot to get them interested in. Um,
Right.
have obviously having written a book now. Have you had feedback from younger people, or is it really just more of a nerdy cohort of older people who have been responding to your new book?
It's been fairly equally split. Like young people have gotten into it. Some of my friends have bought it for their kids. We're not 12-year-olds aren't getting into it, and it's not appropriate for a 12-year-old. But a later high school student, that there's been some of those who are in their junior senior years, whose parents have got the book for them. And I'm also finding that like history nerds, military history people, and in addition to wine people, are getting into it just as much as wine people are. And I was hoping that would be the case. I was hoping that it would span different demographics. I'm happy that younger people, and even people in their 20s, have gravitated to it and found it interesting. I don't think it's a book. I didn't write the book with the intent that like you're going to sit down and read this from cover to cover, over the weekend. It's written just as much as a reference as it is, something to sit down and read. Um, and I'm glad that there's been young people who have gone to the table of contents or gone to the list of maps. There's 71 maps in it, um, which that was a delight. Um, but I'm glad I'm glad to hear from the parents who have bought it, and from the people in their early 20s who have bought it, that they've found some use in it, and they're learning things, and they're finding these little factoids to be interesting. And for some of the youth, some of the younger people, they're doing exactly what I wanted them to do, which is like, here's your little snippet of information. This is your prompt to go through and Google further and do your own research, and
Yeah,
that's what I wanted.
one of the things that I thought was really interesting about your kind of origin story on this was this idea that drinking that Barolo took you to that place, which then took
Mhm.
you to a little bit more discovery about that place, which then made that experience more interesting. Um,
Mhm.
is there something about history maybe that just like tasting notes can't really provide?
Yes, the humanity. Tasting notes can't give you humanity. Um, and even one of the things when I teach wine, and also when I would host groups in wineries in Napa, Everybody gets so caught up on, do I smell raspberry or is that boysenberry? It doesn't matter, that's not going to. There's nothing about the wine that matters for. Um, and I would always steer people away from that, away from that. And nobody's born knowing how to taste, right? I use the analogy that everybody can use scissors, but not everybody is a surgeon. Everybody can drink wine, but not everybody is going to understand wine until you build that foundation. And whether or not you're getting raspberry, if you're sticking your nose in the wrong part of the glass, you're not the tasting notes aren't going to get you anywhere anyway. If you don't have, if you're not used to smelling things, and even as a kid, I smelled everything as a kid. My sister thought it was the weirdest things. I would be smelling paper and stamps and like very very strange child. Um, and so if you don't make a habit of like smelling all these things and getting familiar with building that database of scents, um, those tasting notes are just going to be like, all right. But most people stick their nose in the bottom of the glass, and that's normal. That's intuitive. But all you're getting down there is alcohol. So yeah, you're not gonna smell the hints of raspberry down there in the alcohol zone. Um,
Yeah, one of the reasons why I'm doing this series is I have this theory, and you're welcome to correct it, that yeah, the tasting notes don't really matter much, and truthfully, people don't really care about the geography of Barolo. They just want to hang out with people. They want to talk about a book they read or history, and sometimes even their
uh-huh,
feelings. And we
uh-huh,
use we use a lot of things in the wine industry to try to get people to engage with wine, and it's almost never about conversation. And the great thing I would say about the way you were looking at it is it sparks a lot of conversation because
mhm.
obviously you take us through a long an arc of history, and we can discover things like, oh yeah, I guess there were treaties back then, and that's a good reason to
Yeah,
drink another glass.
exactly. Like let's thumb through that.
So, what I really want to get to though with you is I want to get get maybe even go back to the Sacramento days or now that you have this. But what is the way to talk to somebody who's like, I think I want to get interested in wine, but I don't feel like I know enough. Like, what is it to help them get started in your view?
I always start them with structure. Um, if we're in a setting where grabbing a lemon and some walnuts or a black tea is possible, then I always start with that. Because going back to the tasting notes, whether or not you get raspberry isn't going to really tell you anything about the wine because, there's so many different wines where raspberry is part of the aromatic profile. But if you get, if you're having, let's say you're having spaghetti and meatballs, right? And you go get yourself a Lambrusco. Okay, you got some raspberry in there, but it's not really going to hit the way a Barolo or a Barbaresco or a Piedmont wine would. And it might be getting a little more to the cherry zone with that, but you're in the red fruit zone. Um, it's not going to be the pairing that you want. So I think when it comes to wine, even if your intention isn't for pairing, when it comes to wine, the structure to me, if there was one word I had to use, that would be the most important word. Um, and then 1A would be acid. You need to learn. It's and those are easy things to understand. Those are objective. They're not subjective things. You can gauge how long your mouth is watering to see are you in low acid or high acid or somewhere in between. Um, you can have something high tannin and have different levels of fattiness in a food to see where the tannin level cuts and everything. Like these are objective things that you can gauge. Um, so I think it takes some of the mystery. It makes it to where you can build from there. And also as you're learning structure, you learn a little bit about climate because you learn that it's going to be a cooler climate that makes the higher acid and things like that. Um, and as you're learning about those different climates, well, now you might be in a different place, and so now you're learning about this place, and you can't learn about a place without learning about some of its history. And I structure has always been what I present for people to start with, and then as you get into structure, it's impossible to not talk about history. Um, so it's that's what I do, and it was effective.
So you are promoting the book with some of your time, but of course the hard work of that's done. What are you working on now? What are you excited about? What's going on?
I mean, I'm excited about exploring Albania more. One of the things that I want to get into now that I'm a little more settled in, I've been here for almost 5 months now. Um, Next week, we're coming up on 5 months. Now I'm a little more settled in. The book is out. Um, One of the gaps in the book is that there's not really a lot of documentation for ancient Illyrian wine being, Albanian. Um, and so I want to get out to the wine regions in Albania and pick brains of vintners out there to see what else I can learn. And then I've also put together, and it's where a lot of my focus has gone. I put together a program for wineries to gift the ebook version of the book to their wine club members as an allocation gift. And I created a way to be able to customize it for them and include um, in order to tie it to the winery, put their logo, but also create a custom map to show where their winery is in relation to activity. So that's been what I've really been working on. But I need to take some time to start getting out to the Albanian regions, and that was part of the goals of coming here because through writing the book, I learned oh, I don't really know a lot about this, and that's where I'll be living. So good time to go play archaeologist.
So let me take the opportunity to sell a couple books. So at ranking_palette is your Instagram. You could click right there if I recall. Is that right? If you'd like to
Yeah,
learn more about the book. And frankly, it's a great follow. So for anybody who's interested in following somebody through their adventures, post-intelligence world into the expat life, Hillary's Instagram is a great place to start. So thanks again for coming and doing
Thank
this
you.
with me, and congrats on the book, and hopefully the continued expansion of your knowledge base in Albania.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I hope we can talk again some other time.
We will.